What is up, guys? This is QRem from the Trinity of Lift, and today I'm going to bring all of you guys my Zoodiac Darklord deck profile for this March 2017 format. Now, although the synergies might not be obvious in this deck, I do feel actually that Zoodiac Darklords do work together because there is one specific card, which I'll get to in a minute, that really does blend the archetypes together in my opinion, and again, I wouldn't knock this deck and say that it's just me just trying to shill Zoodiacs into every deck that I own, although it kind of is. But I'd say that don't just write off this deck as bad before you try it, because it's like that's what I was honestly thinking too when I first originally thought of this idea for this Zoodiac Darklord deck, that it's probably not going to work, but in practice, actually, this deck does work together quite well. So without further ado, we're just going to jump right into it, starting off with the main deck as per usual. Okay, so for the Dark Lords, it is a slimmed down version of the normal Dark Lord lineup, so just keep that in mind. We have 3 copies of yugioh, of course, though, because yugioh is like by far the best Dark Lord in the deck. You always want to see her in every one of your opening hands. She does just so much for this deck that you just have to play 3 of her, and any less is probably incorrect. Moving on, we have 3 copies of Superbia, because Superbia is your Monster Reborn monster. And again, he's really important for your rank 8 plays and to help you just get more advantage from your Dark Lord contacts. So again, we have to have 3 copies of Superbia because he's also really good. And he's also level 8 for trade-in. Moving on, we do have 2 copies of Darklord Nastin. Now, I only have 2 copies of Nastin in this time because I felt like you don't have enough Darklord names in this deck to really use Nastin at 3, and I felt like Nastin clogged a little bit more than usual in any traditional Darklord build, because in this build of Darklords, we of course have more non-Darklord cards in the main deck because of the Zoo cards and all that kind of stuff. So I felt like Nastin's in-hand effect was rather weird, and you wouldn't really use it a lot. You'd usually just use Nastin for like discard fodder for your yugiohs and stuff, or your allure targets anyway. So that is why I felt like Nastin really wasn't a big impact card in this deck. That's why I cut it down to 2 copies. Finally, for the last Dark Lord, we have 2 copies of Zeratul. Now, again, similarly to Nastin, I didn't like 3 copies of Zeratul in this deck because it did clog a little bit more than usual, but you still gotta run at least 2 Zeratul in my opinion, because he is important for your rank 8 plays, and that is kind of the big selling point of this version of Zoodiacs, where along with the Zoodiac cards and your Dark Lord cards just providing big threats, you also have the ability to make consistent rank 8s in the Dark Lord Zoodiac deck too, and again, going with that theme, you need Zeratul for those rank 8s, so that is why you still have to run at least 2 in my opinion. So alrighty, that'll be it for the entire Dark Lord lineup. Moving on to the Zoo cards and the cards that support the Zoo deck. We have 3 copies of Rat, and this is the only Zoo monster I play. I didn't want to play Whiptail in this deck because really you need a lot of, I guess you could say it, live cards in this Zoodiac Darklord deck. You really cannot afford to run cards that you can draw and don't do anything by themselves immediately, because again, the big whole spiel with Darklords is that they can brick themselves a lot of the time. So I wanted to just have the most consistent like engine of Zoodiacs in this build, so that is why I'm only literally running 3 copies of Rat for these Zoo monsters. Of course, to complement the Rat peers, we have 3 copies of Terratop and the 1 copy of Takentenborg, because again, these cards make Invoker, and Invoker gets to Rat, and then Rat just goes off and gives you like a +3 or whatever. So of course we have these Speedroids because they're just also really, really good. And then finally, for the last monster that I just really feel is like the best card in this deck, we have 1 copy of Coach Captain Bearman. Now, this is the big card of this deck, and the reason why this deck can even be played whatsoever, because Bearman serves many different purposes, believe it or not, in this deck, comparatively to something like maybe like a pure Zoodiac build, where they've all been cutting this card for other better cards, where Bearman is a level 8, first of all, so you can trade it in if you ever do draw Bearman dead for whatever reason. He is also a searchable trade-in target from Broad Bull, so if you ever have to just not use Bearman and you want to use other plays and you can have a trade-in in your hand, you can just trade in Bearman for a free 2 cards, and he won't really clog that way. And then also, of course, the big selling point of Bearman is that he can make Coach King Giant Trainer, and Giant Trainer can just by itself unbrick hands because he does draw you 3 free cards, with also the chance to burn your opponent for a max of about 2,400. And because Bearman can make Giant Trainer in this deck, you can use the Giant Trainer draws from the end part of your Zoodiac combo to draw the 3 cards and hopefully unbrick the Dark Lord aspect of your deck and just get your Darklord engine going. And just in my opinion, Bearman is the card that really just blends these archetypes together because it gives the Zoo combo a big beat stick at the end of it, and Bearman also helps you unclog the Darklord part of your deck. So I just, again, really feel like Bearman is just so darn good in this deck. Moving on to the spells now, we of course have 3 copies of the Zoodiac Barrage, because Barrage is, again, just like the best starter card in the game right now, and you gotta run 3 copies of it in almost every Zoo deck that you play. Then for the other spells, we of course have the 3 copies of Banishment, because having a Roto for your Darklords is pretty important. We have 3 copies of the Darklord Contact, because having Monster Reborns for your guys is pretty important. We have 3 copies of Allure, because drawing cards in this deck is the primary engine for consistency, so we gotta have 3 copies of Allure. And then again, similarly, we have 3 copies of Trade-In, because again, like I said, the primary way that this deck is consistent is through drawing cards, so having more draw cards is never bad. So yeah, that'll be it for all of the, I guess, quote-unquote consistency spells in this deck. And then for the just generic good spells, we have 2 copies of My Body as a shield, because I still like wholeheartedly believe that this card is cheating. Like every time I draw this card, I feel so dirty whenever I negate something like a Raigeki or a Dryden or whatever. Like, this card is just still so darn good, and I play 2 copies of it in this deck. And then for the last couple of spells, we have 1 copy of Soul Charge because it's broken. We have 1 copy of Raigeki because we don't like to have our opponent's board staying around. And we have 1 copy of Upstart because 39 cards. Yeah. So yeah, that'll be it for all of these spells. And then for the traps, it's just really simple. We have 1 copy of each Darklord trap. I didn't want to have multiples of each of these because, again, similar to like what I said with Nastin, you kind of brick with these trap cards in the main deck, and especially because, again, you only do have 2 Nastin, that I really didn't want to have more copies of these cards. I only wanted to have 1 of each of these traps whenever I need them, so I can search them with things like Banishment and whatnot, and they never really clog at 1 each. So again, we only have 1 of these traps to round off the main deck. So yeah, that'll be it. 40 cards as usual. Like, I rarely ever make main decks with more than 40 cards. Moving on to the side deck, it's nothing really special. Like, the Zoo cards at least are not that special. We have 2 copies of Dryden because you can always make 2 usually, and Dryden is just really, really good. We have 1 copy of Broadbow, 1 copy of Tiger Mortar, and then 1 copy of the Wild Bow, Boarbow, whatever, to round off all of our Zoo Xyz monsters. Moving on to our 2 rank 3 monsters in our extra, we have 1 copy of Evoker because, again, just it has to go with Terror Top, and then 1 copy of Totem Bird because whenever you draw Terror Top plus Rat, you can just make Totem Bird plus your Zoodiac combo, which is still really, really good. Moving on to our rank 4s, again, we only have 2. We have 1 copy of Daigusto Emerald because, again, recycling resources is important in this deck, and then 1 copy of Castel for problem removal. Next up, finally for the last couple of Xyz monsters in our extra, is all the big rank monsters. We have the 1 Giant Trainer because, like I said, this card is broken in this deck, and just having the ability to unbrick your hands whenever you just draw the Zoodiac combo is really, really strong. We have 1 copy of the Felgrand because Felgrand is really good at going into Dryden boards. We have 1 copy of Harbinger because, again, negating Barrage is pretty nice. We have the Galaxy Ice Cypher Dragon and the 1 Full Armor Photon Dragon because stealing your opponent's Dryden's or Invokers or whatever, and then making this card over it is pretty darn strong. And then finally, for the last big rank monster, we have 1 copy of number 81 because this is for when you have 2 Ishus on board, and making this is pretty darn good, so I hear, because Dryden cannot get over this. So yeah, that's pretty darn good. So yeah, guys, that will be it for my Zoodiac Darklord deck profile. I did go through this deck rather quick than usual because of really, I feel like there's not a lot of cards to explain outside of the Coach Captain Bearman in this deck, which is why, again, this video is going to be sub 10 minutes. But again, I really would recommend that you guys try this deck out if you have the cards because it's so much fun. And again, it just reinforces the point that the Zoodiac deck is arguably one of the best designed archetypes of all time, just because of how it can really help elevate certain decks into, I guess, the metagame, if you could call it that. So yeah, as always, this is QRem from the Trinity of Lift, and I'll see all of you guys later. Peace out.